I thought we'd talk a little bit about data and analytics
Yeah.
tonight. So yeah, firstly, thanks very much for joining me, because I've not really had a chance to chat with anyone about this subject at length, and it's an area that I'm sort of half familiar with through my work because I work in tech, but it's not really an area that touches like front end development in any meaningful way, I don't think. So perhaps you could start us off by like explaining what the fuck analytics is, and then we'll sort of go from there into like how you got into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think anyone really understands what analytics is anyway, because it's just a word that is thrown into the mix. So that there's kind of like four types of analytics that people will do things with. They might not know that's what they're doing, but there's four types, which is your descriptive analytics, which is where you're describing what's going on.
Right.
So that's kind of telling the story using data, which we've seen a lot of COVID, and maybe we'll touch into that in a bit. But there's a lot of kind of, how do I tell this story in a way that looks like it's got facts with it? Let me use data.
Right. Okay. So it's like,
So I'm going to give you a line chart or a pie chart or something,
I see.
and that will support the thing that I'm saying.
Right. Okay. So in the scenario of like COVID data, it would be like, right, let's get all of this data in from here that tracked how many people had a vaccine last week, and let's also get all of this data in from here, and then presenting that in a way that people can consume it and it makes sense. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of I've got all this raw data. What do I do with it? Descriptive analytics try to draw out a story from it. You have diagnostic analytics, which then adds the why to that story. So not just what's going on with the data, but why has the data done what it's done, which normally means you need at least two, but preferably multiple data sets to give you a true picture of what's going on. The example I like to use is, I think it was in the 70s, and anyone feel free to fact check me on this because I never have, is in the 70s, the rumor is that Labour lost the election because it was raining, and Labour voters don't vote if it's raining,
Right.
which is a very big assumption. And people today would be like, that's ridiculous. But this was 50 years ago. So could well have been true at the time. But people don't normally consider, when you're looking at a data stream of any type, to consider external factors like traffic or weather. Like if you're going to do a customer satisfaction survey, if it's sunny, send it straight away. If it's raining, wait till it's sunny.
It's
Because people will be happier, they'll be more relaxed,
yeah.
and they can answer, and these kind of, so that's, if you were doing true analytics, you take every single piece of data possible to start to diagnose why something happened, because normally your sample is so limited that you can't really find out. So diagnostic analytics adds to the story to add a diagnosis of why.
Okay.
Why is this happening? Then you have predictive analytics, which you can guess what that is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's using a number of different models.
Okay.
People will do this with Excel a lot. So they'll add a line, add a trend line, and then forecast it a bit. And it will just add this kind of linear line that kind of just goes off into the future and goes, see, we're going up or we're going down. But there's actually a lot of different predictive models, which I can't fully define or understand. But the best fit predictions are the ones that try to predict from a previous data set onto a current data set to see if the prediction model would have predicted correctly.
Right. Okay.
And if it would, then it'll use that model into the future.
Okay. So that would be like, I remember hearing an example of this where they said that somewhere in the depths of like MI5 or MI6 or like the Met or somewhere, they were running models or like data sets or something to show like how likely it was that there would be another London riots. And they were saying it can sort of come down to just the weather. And they were saying that back in a few years ago when the actual riots kicked off, they said it was like a sort of perfect storm of all of these different variables all coming together at the same time. And they were like, so now what we do is we look out for not necessarily those exact variables, but similar sort of instances that could serve as a sort of, a spark.
Yeah. Well, the best predictions are the ones that aren't based on a single data set. So you're taking all these, you make sure that you've got a diagnosis in place first, because if you can act on a diagnosis rather than the main thing that you're measuring, then you can almost either preempt it or make something happen quicker.
I see.
So, which kind of goes into the fourth type of analytics that is called prescriptive analytics.
Okay.
Which is where you're using all the data that you have, which is both the story, the diagnosis, the prediction, to then prescribe what we should do about all of the data. Because in a normal environment where you have data, you should use it for something.
Yeah.
This should cause some kind of action to make it worthwhile. And I will when I'm kind of involved in these conversations with work, a lot of the time I'm asking this simple question: what is the point in you collecting this data? Because if you don't know why you're collecting it, it's wasting everybody's time and everybody's storage, and all this kind of electronics that's making sure that data is captured is just purely waste. And it's just this bump that you don't need.
Is there a sort of conversation that you sometimes have then in that scenario where it's like a fifth type of analytics, where it's like consultative analytics, where you go in and you say, like, basically a client says, look, we've been collecting data for 5 years. What the fuck can we do with it? Like, is there that sort of conversation that happens, or is it very because that sounds very reactive? Is it more sort of proactive?
Well, a lot. So I had a stat, and this a couple of years old now, but there's like 80% or 90% of organizations have so much data and they're doing nothing with it.
Really?
Like absolutely nothing. They're just sitting on this data because they were told at some point it was useful to collect.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the difference from when I first got into data over where it is now. Is we were kind of in an information age, if you like, where there was loads of information. And if we talk about kind of like what Google was doing back in the 90s and kind of organizing all this information, it's kind of being put online and everything's being archived and everything else. So much information available to us. What has moved now is now, rather than it being information, it's just raw data, because the information has now been it's finished. We've got it all now. And so now we're generating fresh information, but it's not information yet. It's just data. It's just bits and bytes everywhere, that without something to collect it and to tell the story and to make it into information, it's useless. And actually that's the challenge of something like COVID.